אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה.
Welcome to this week's installment of Weekly Torah Perspective. I refuse to call it a shiur because it really is just an unburdening of my mind to those who want to listen and who possibly have some interest in it. We're looking this week, by exception, not at the Parsha, but we're looking at the Haftarah, the Haftarah. It's a special Haftarah this week because it is Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat before Tish'a, before the fast on next Thursday of the 9th of the month of Av, that is coming Thursday in the week, which is the saddest day in the Jewish year. It is the day actually that started in the book of Bamidbar that we just finished, in the Parsha of the Meraglim, in Parsha Shlach Lecha, where the Meraglim brought the plans for the future as directed by God to go into the land and face a new life with the difficulties and with the adversities of having to conquer this land. Basically to live a life not like in the wilderness, which was a life guided and enabled by supernatural assistance. The supernatural assistance of God in the new situation would be more hidden, would be more indirect, it would be less noticeable. There wouldn't be bread falling from the sky like we had in the wilderness. There wouldn't be miraculous water that would flow from rocks. There wouldn't be protective clouds that would shield us by day and by night. And there wouldn't be a column of fire going in front of us by day and a column of smoke by day and a column of fire by night. It would be a different type of life. And they were afraid of this new life, and therefore they brought a negative report about the future, a negative report about the prospects of this enterprise of entering into Eretz Israel, into the land of Israel, succeeding. And Hashem said, you will now have every year one day when you will have to revisit the failings of the past and contemplate them and not forget them and see which way you will go in the future. It is not just Tish'a B'Av, it's not just a day that we mourn the destruction of two temples. We do. They were destroyed on Tish'a B'Av, but many other things happened on Tish'a B'Av. The First World War broke out, for example. These events all have something in common. They change the world from one situation into another. And they end a world of certainties and they inaugurate a world of uncertainties. It is well known that while we had a temple, in the period of the first temple, its testimony to that you can find in our prophets, is that nothing can happen to us. They said, Mikdash Hashem, Mikdash Hashem, the house of God, the house of God. Beit Hashem, Beit Hashem. As long as we have a temple, nothing can go wrong. And God said, we'll see about that. My presence in your midst, in this temple, is conditional. It's conditional on your behavior. And it's that behavior that is being addressed in this week's Haftarah, in this week's Haftarah, which is from the first chapter in the book of Isaiah, Yeshayahu Perek Aleph, 27 verses into that chapter. Chapters 1, verse 1 through 27. 27 is a significant number because it's the number of letters of the Hebrew alphabet, if you include the 5 final letters, 22 letters in the normal alphabet, and then 5 additional letters or for the final kaf, the mem, the nun, the pei, and the tzaleh. All right, let's have a look at the very first pasuk in the Haftarah. Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amoz, asher chozo al Yehuda b'Yerushalayim, b'mei Uziyahu Yosom Achaz Chizkiyahu, it says Yechizkiyahu Malchei Yehuda. It's usually translated as the vision of Isaiah the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Yehuda and Jerusalem in the days of these 4 kings, Uzziah, Yosom, Achaz, and Chizkiyahu, the kings, all 4 kings of Yehuda. It needs a little bit of explanation, this pasuk, just to know what we're talking about and also the time frame. First, it speaks about the kings of Yehuda and not the kings of Yisrael. Yisrael was the northern kingdom, Yehuda was the southern kingdom. Yeshayahu was actually himself from the royal house of David. He is called here the son of Amoz. And Amoz was the brother of Amaziah, who was one of the kings. He was the predecessor of the first king in this list of 4 kings, Uzziah. His predecessor was Amaziah, and Amaziah had a brother Amoz, who was the father of Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu was a royal prince. Where do you find a royal prince who goes out on a limb and becomes basically an outcast in society because of his dire warnings to the people, which didn't make him very popular? In fact, his end was that Menashe was the successor of the last king in this list, Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu's son was Menashe. Menashe was one of the worst kings we ever had. He reigned for 40 years and he promoted idol worship in the land. And he actually killed Yeshaya. How did he kill Yeshaya? He found Yeshaya when Yeshaya was hiding for him in the hollow of a tree, and he captured him and he sawed him in half. He killed him by sawing him in half. Now Menashe was actually a descendant of Yeshaya, because Yeshaya's daughter married Chizkiyahu. The last king in this list, the father of Menashe, was the daughter, the father of Menashe was married to the daughter of Yeshaya. So Yeshaya was Menashe's grandfather. Menashe killed his own grandfather, as despots do, as corrupt kings do. It's not an unknown thing. They kill their sons, they kill their brothers, they kill their father, they kill their grandfather when it suits them. This is one piece of historical background of this pasuk. Another piece of historical background is that this speaks about the period when the northern kingdom was actually being destroyed by the Assyrian Empire. The northern kingdom of the 10 tribes was destroyed, and after the destruction of this kingdom, these 10 tribes were exiled, never to be heard of again. It doesn't mean that all of them were exiled. I mean, all the members of these tribes, no. Many of them actually fled to the south and were absorbed into the population of the other kingdom, the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Yehuda. And it is actually from that time onwards that the entire tribal system collapsed, so that later on, when you look at the Babylonian exile and the Persian end of that exile, the book of Esther speaks about the Jews as Yehudim. The word Yehudim never occurs before that time. Yehudim, from which we have all the modern language equivalents of the word Jew, Jude, Judy in various Romance languages. One exception is Russian. In Russian we call it Yevrei, Hebrew, but in Polish you call it Žid, or in Ukrainian you call it Žid. In Russian that is a very pejorative term. It's a term of abuse. The distinction between one name and another name, or one interpretation of a name and another interpretation of a name being positive or negative, depends on who says it. If we call each other Yidden, we don't mean anything bad. When a goy, a non-Jew, calls us a Yid or a Yid, we know he doesn't mean well. You find this is not peculiar to us. You find this in the word nigger. That's when a white man says it, it's the N-word. You can't say it. But black people call each other nigger the whole time. Just like we call each other Yidden the whole time, but when a non-Jew says Yid, then it is pejorative. But I digress again. So we're talking about a period in our history that was a destruction of the northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom was also threatened by the same empire, the same Assyrian empire, and barely survived. It barely survived in the days of Chizkiyahu, the last of the 4 kings mentioned here, and the son-in-law of Yeshaya, because he married his daughter. There's another problem in this pasuk. There's another problem in this verse. Think about how we usually translate it. The vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, which he saw in the days of these 4 kings. Is it feasible that Yeshaya, the prophet Isaiah, had one vision that lasted the reign of 4 kings? No. He had to eat, he had to drink, he had to go about his daily life. He couldn't have been in a state of prophecy for such a long time. And by the way, it's even technically impossible because prophets have their visions by night. We have this from our sources. The only exception is Moshe Rabbeinu, who spoke with God at any time. And he's called B'chol Beisi Ne'eman, he is trusted in my entire house, meaning any time of day or night, he can approach me. And we see this quite often, that Moshe Rabbeinu simply goes and speaks to Hashem and asks Hashem, what should I do in this situation? What should I do in that situation? For example, in the episode of Pesach Sheni, when people came to complain that they could not bring a Korban Pesach because of circumstances, they were not pure, not ritually pure, or they were not near Jerusalem, where you can bring a Korban, you can't bring it outside Jerusalem. Of course, in the Midbar there was no Jerusalem, and the only complaint that they had is we are Tomei lenefesh Adam, we are impure because of contact with a dead body. But when the law of Korban Pesach Sheni was introduced, it was made not only for this circumstance, that you are tamei, that you are not ritually pure, but also if you are through circumstances not in Jerusalem at the right time. You can catch up a month later with Pesach Sheni. But Moshe Rabbeinu had to ask Hashem for this ruling, so to say, to include it in the Torah. Another case is the case of the daughters of Tzlafchat, the daughters of this man Tzlafchat, who complained that since their father had no sons, his inheritance would go to his uncle or his brothers or the children of his brothers. And they said, that's not fair, we should get our share. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, wait, I'll ask Hashem what the halacha, what the correct ruling is in your case. Moshe Rabbeinu could do that only because he had access to Hashem at any time of day or night. But normal prophets, other prophets apart from Moshe Rabbeinu, do not have this possibility. They get their visions by night. So, every day that the sun rises, it is prophet on hold until the sun goes down, and then the prophet is back in job and can have a vision. So, any vision can only last as long as a night. So how can it be a vision that continued during the reign of 4 kings? So that's rejected. In fact, this problem is diagnosed and addressed by Yehuda Hirsch, Julius Hirsch. He was the son of Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, the leader of German Jewry in the 19th century. And he had a son, he was a businessman, but he spent his spare time writing a commentary on the book of Yeshayahu, in Sefer Yeshayahu, and he called this Das Buch Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, and it's based on the insights of the Rabbiner Hirsch, of his father, but it is by the hand of Yehuda Hirsch, Julius Hirsch. And he addresses, right in the beginning of his commentary, this very problem. And his solution is very, very, let's say, innovative, imaginative, but based on grammar. He says we translate the word asher wrongly. I'll read you the pasuk again and try to hear what Julius Hirsch is saying. Chazal Yeshayahu, the vision of Yeshaya, Ben Amoz, the son of Amoz, Asher Chazor. The question is, what does it mean, Asher Chazor? Asher Chazor is usually translated then as which he saw. But then the Asher goes back on Chazon, the vision that he saw. Julius Hirsch suggests that it doesn't go back on Chazon, it goes back on Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu Asher Chazor. Yeshayahu who saw. Not the vision which he saw, but the vision of Yeshayahu who saw. And then he interprets what the word Chazor means, the word that we translate which he saw, Chazor. Lachazos in Hebrew means to see, but there's another word that we usually translate as seeing, lir'os, to see. What's the difference between lachazos, to see, and lir'os, to see? Lir'os, to see, is related to our perception of seeing which we have with our normal visual capabilities, with our visual cognition. Chazor has more the connotation of to gaze, to see something which others cannot see. And Hirsch relates it to the Hebrew word chazeh, chazeh. Chazeh means the breastbone, this part of the body, that shields the breast, that shields the heart, that shields what's inside. And he says that a chazeh, a seer, is somebody who sees what's on the inside, not what is on the outside, not that which is manifest, but that which only somebody with a very keen perception can pick up not through physical senses, but by observing and drawing conclusions that are beyond what you can see. That is a choseh. There is in the Hasidic tradition a man who lived in Lublin in Poland, and he is called the Choseh of Lublin, the Choseh of Lublin, the seer of Lublin. And I think we have it that he was actually blind, which is an interesting comment. When can you be a choseh? When can you be a choseh? A choseh, somebody who makes use of this quality of chazon. It is when you discount what your eyes see and pay more attention to what the eyes cannot see. And that is how Hirsch interprets it here. Yeshaya had the ability to be a choseh, to be a seer, to see beyond what the eyes can see, to see what's going on inside. And Hirsch continues and says, society as it was in the time of Yeshayahu was self-congratulatory. They said, everything is okay. It will be fine tomorrow. We don't have to worry. The Assyrians will never get to us. We are protected by divine protection. We have nothing to worry about. And they went around their business. And they lived like one says in Jewish parlance, shiny Yidden. They lived like beautiful Jews, meaning they were members of a mutual appreciation society. And therefore they lulled themselves asleep. And they were blind for what was going on inside. And that's what this Haftarah is addressing. Let's continue. Shimu Shomayim v'hazinu eretz. Listen, heavens, and lend your ear, land. Ki Hashem diber, because Hashem has spoken. Bonim gidalti, I have brought up sons, children. V'romamti, and I have elevated them. V'heim pashubi, and they have rebelled against me. They have intentionally gone wrong vis-a-vis me. That's pshia. Pshia is when you know it's wrong, but you do it anyway. That's a pshia. It's not a chet. A chet, which is something, it's wrong, but it has the connotation of missing the mark, of falling short of a standard. Pshia means going out of your way to do consciously what you shouldn't do. And that's what Yeshaya is telling the people. And he says, hear heavens and earth, lend your ear. The word ozen, ear, is related to the word for a scale, weighing scales. That's called moznayim in Hebrew. And it's not for nothing that the balance organ in the human body resides in the ear. It's the ear that hosts the mechanism by which we know whether we are level or not level. And this is physically so, but this is also spiritually so. If you listen, if you lend your ear, you will be able to calibrate the level on which you stand, whether you're going straight or not. And again, the notion of being straight, being on the level, being square, has always, even in our language, the connotation of being all right, being there where you should be. There's a Hebrew name, Yeshurun, happens to be my middle name, but the word Yeshurun is related to Yoshor. Yoshor means right, straight as an arrow. We have this connotation in our language, and we have this notion in our brain that straight means honest and crooked means false, means bad. These are metaphors, but all metaphors are interesting things. They relate physical things, straightness is a physical notion, to non-physical concepts, to more abstract things. So we call this straightness. Now comes the next pasuk. Let's listen to it. It says, Yoda shol konehu v'chamor evus ba'alov Yisrael lo yoda ami lo hispanim. An ox knows its owner, and a donkey knows the crib, the feeding crib that his master provides. Yisrael, Israel, lo yoda, did not know, was not a knower, and my people did not understand, did not consider, did not reflect. He's not talking about Judah and Jerusalem here. He's talking about the northern kingdom that was already destroyed. He says, he makes an analysis, he makes a diagnosis. Why is it that they did not have a future? Because they did not know. What does it mean to know? In Hebrew, lodas, to know, means to have an intimate relationship with. The way that an ox relates to its owner and a donkey to the feeding trough in which he finds his food that is provided by his owner is based on a notion of dependence. I cannot live without my owner. I'm a domesticated ox. I'm a domesticated animal. I couldn't even survive in the wild anymore because I'm domesticated. And therefore, I know on which side my bread is buttered. I know where my protection comes from. It comes from my owner. And this is a physical relationship. The animal needs it to survive, right? Domesticated animals live with human beings in a symbiosis, in a mutually beneficial situation. We should not think that farm animals are being oppressed. This is a modern notion. It's a romantic notion, but it's an incorrect notion. You would not be able to survive as a farm animal if you would be let loose in the wild, right? The relationship is based on mutual benefit. The human being derives benefit from the domesticated animal, but on the other hand, the domesticated animal derives benefit from its owner. There is even a theory that says that grain, wheat, is domesticated grass. That's what it is. Wheat is domesticated grass. And the question is, who domesticated whom? How could wheat spread over the world the way it had? Of course, only because human beings planted in all their fields. So who is exploiting whom? Wheat covers entire plains that formerly were grassland, and now they're the huge farms in Ukraine, in the American Midwest. So who has domesticated whom? The question is an absurd question. It is a matter of perspective. From the point of view of human beings, we domesticated the wheat and we domesticated the ox. But from the other point of view, the ox and the wheat has domesticated us to exploit us for their benefit. So what does it have to do with the relationship between God and man? Why does the prophet say that the relationship of the ox to the owner is a paradigm for the relationship of Yisrael to Hashem, to God? Of course, it is, as with any comparison, only true to a certain extent. It certainly means a form of interdependence. God forgive if I call God dependent on us. It is not true. But the propagation of God's name, the declaring God's name in the world, to make God's presence in the world felt, is delegated to human beings, is in our hands. It is our national task as Jews to do that. And therefore, there is a relationship of mutual benefit. God's name is proclaimed in the world, and we, by doing that, merit his protection. But the converse is, if we don't do it, we do not merit his protection. In fact, on Tish'a B'Av, we will say, Eli Tzion, the last of the killers. It's usually sung as some kind of a joyous song, but it's not joyous at all. It is the depth of tragedy. And one of the phrases that we have in Eli Tzion is, V'al shimcho asher chulol, and on your name that has been profaned. That when we mourn on Tish'a B'Av, we mourn for a temple, we mourn for national disasters that struck us, but most of all, we mourn for the fact that God's name has been desecrated in the world. That when we do not do our job as the Jewish nation, God's name gets desecrated. Because it's either being promoted, and if it's not promoted, it's desecrated. There is no such thing as stasis, as standing still in this regard. Either you go forward or you slide backwards. I'm saying too much. The rest of the Haftarah diagnoses what is wrong, and it doesn't mince words. It speaks about the people who are evildoers, who are corrupt, who provoke God. And in the fourth verse, the end of the fourth verse says, Nozoru or Nozoru Ochar. They are drawn backwards. And I want to analyze that word for a moment. We spoke last week about the phenomenon that roots that start with the nun have a connotation of passivity to it, something that you don't do, but it's done to you in a certain sense, because of the familiarity or the commonality between the nun of the stem here, of the root, and the nun of the nif'al, which always indicates passivity. Nozoru ochal. The word nozoru means to be estranged. It comes from zor. Zor means a stranger. Nozoru ochal means they have estranged backwards. What does that mean? They were not strangers with God. They knew God. They experienced Hashem. They experienced Hashem in Yetzias Mitzrayim, in the Exodus from Egypt. They experienced Hashem in the Midbar for 40 years. They have a history, and now they have abandoned Him. By abandoning Him, by estranging themselves from Him, they have regressed. They have gone backwards. And that's what I was hinting at. When you do not grow, when you do not go forward, it is not that you stand in one place, you are going backwards. As the Red Queen says in Through the Looking Glass of Lewis Carroll, to stay in the same place, you have to run as fast as you can. To get anywhere to the future, you have to run at least twice as fast. And that was one of the typical Lewis Carroll jokes. With a lot of philosophy behind it. If you think about it, you see the absurdity of it. But you also know emotionally, when you're honest to yourself, that anything that is not progress is by its very nature regression. So, the refusal to turn around, the refusal to learn from the mistakes of the past is going back to that past. As it says, those who do not learn from history are bound to repeat it. And therefore, the question of the Prophet in this Haftarah is, why would you do that? Why would you not choose to go forward? Because your future is potentially a good future. We're living today in an age that we also look at the future with apprehension. There's a new world dawning on us with the technology that we do not quite understand yet, that has many, many unknowns. The question is, what kind of future are we going to expect from the artificial intelligences, the AIs that are at the horizon? Today it's a ChatGPT, which is a rather primitive form of AI, but I have seen much more advanced models that I have had some testing access to, and I must tell you, it is quite amazing what is awaiting us. And everybody asks, how do we know that these intelligences, being intelligent in a technical sense, that they can perform certain tasks very, very, very well, and can employ forms of reasoning, how do we know that they will not turn against us? Right? And there is a lot of this anxiety going around, a lot of doom thinking. The truth of the matter is, how did these models learn? Where do they get their knowledge from? What data were they fed? The answer is they were fed our data. They learned from our behavior. They learned from our way of reacting to reality. They learn from the way we handle our environment. We are, in a certain sense, their parents. And we have a responsibility to bring up our children with good norms. And we don't do that by teaching them. We do that by giving them the example to follow. In other words, when we are anxious about the future with AIs, what we should be anxious about is not how they will behave, but how we are behaving. What example we give them, what conclusion those AIs can draw when they consume our internet. I don't know if you may have browsed a little bit around on the internet, and depending on your inclinations, you may have avoided all the dodgy stuff that's going on. But the truth of the matter is, the biggest money makers on the internet is pornography. And the second biggest is gambling. And the big threat is not so much from the gambling and the pornography. The biggest threat is from the corruption of our public discourse, of the way we discuss problems with each other. We don't discuss them anymore. We shout at each other from our respective bubble chambers. Is that the example that we want to give to our children? Our children being the AIs of the future now? We have to stick to values that will lead to a better future, not to the values that have led to the disasters of the past. If we think about that on Tish'a, if we think about that in the days to come, then we can make Tish'a into a day. It is sad. When you look at what happened in the past, it is sad. You can't get around it. It makes you cry. But crying can be very, very wholesome. If it means that you are going to reflect and say, how can we do it a little bit better? Not that we will tomorrow be ideal human beings, but if tomorrow we can be a little bit less wrong than we are today, we will have made a huge step forward. With that in mind, I wish you an easy fast. It should be easy on your body. It should be hard on your mind. You should suffer in your mind. But the fasting shouldn't harm you too much. And if you're not healthy, please ask your rabbi, please do not fast if it's not compatible with your health situation. and afterwards have a bagel, have a cup of coffee. It's over. You can't keep on mourning, you can't be mourning the past. We do that too much. We delve into, and we end up with guilt feelings for things that we didn't have any influence over. That is, when in today's society people say that we have to account for the mistakes of our fathers, what they kind of imply is, don't worry about your own mistakes. As long as you give the virtue signaling about the mistakes of your fathers, then you have earned your badge of honor and you are crowned with the halo of holiness. The halo of holiness does not come from bemoaning the past. The halo of holiness comes from having the right future. Thank you very much and have a good Shabbos.
והוא עובר, והוא עובר, והוא יהיה בתפארה. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובר והוא יהיה בתפארה. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובר בתפארה והוא עובר והוא יהיה בתפארה.